Okay, we are back. Here is a lesson on the four types of gigs. This is more of a semantics lesson so that we're making sure that we're both speaking the same language. So every time I talk about a gig or any of these four types of gigs, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Now, let's start with the word gigs itself because that means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. In this course, when I say the word gig or gigs, I'm referring to paid opportunities where you're performing on your saxophone. So that is on a live stage. That's not a behind the scenes thing. For example, I wouldn't consider a live gig recording for someone's album in your apartment or even going to the studio and recording for me is not a live gig. And that's not something that we will be diving into per se in this course. In later modules, I will touch on elements of recording from home and elements of preparing like backlogs of repertoire and different other technical kind of at home things you can do in the music industry. But I would never call any of those a gig in my language, like terminology of this course. Now, here are the four classifications for live performances on the saxophone. We have the corporate gig, the individual gig, the artist gig, and the collaborative gig. I'm just going to jump right in because I have a lot of information to touch on in this lesson because in the next module, I'm actually going to break down the repertoire that I recommend for all four of these and even how to build your own repertoire lists for each type of these gigs. Let's get into it. All right, the corporate gig. There are so many opportunities in the corporate space here in Miami where I work and play for a living. Here are some images of me performing at different corporate events. So this is a wedding, and here was a corporate awards party. You could even see that there's more than one musician with me. Let's break that down as well. For me, and it's different once again for other people, but you're in my course, baby, you're going to speak my language. Corporate gigs are hired through an agency, which means it's contract labor. What does that mean? There's a booking agency. There are many of them all over the country. They are the ones who deal with the client. They book the event for you, and then they hire you to play on their event. They are basically professional middlemen, and they're the ones that are signing your checks, that are giving the checks to you. However, because you are 1099 or in some case W-4, that means you have to pay the taxes during tax season, that awful month of April where you have to go to an accountant or you got to do it online. But I recommend an accountant, and I will talk about it in the final module. I don't want to waste too much time talking about it now. But essentially what that means is you will be paying a percentage of whatever gig that you take from an agency that's 1099 or W-4'd. You will be paying that tax later during tax season. You will owe a percentage of that money to the government later. But it's a nice round number. You'll get paid in probably $50 or $100 increments on your check. It'll look nice in your checking account until that tax season comes. It varies in format, right? So as I showed you before, this is just me and a DJ. This is a full band. So there's large groups, there's small groups, but all of them serve for an agency, for 1099 work, for weddings. So that's an example, a very common example of a corporate gig. Weddings, private parties, oftentimes if it's hired through an agency, in my eyes, corporate gig. Corporate event parties. We do a ton of award ceremonies down here. A lot of times at the Hard Rock Casino in Fort Lauderdale, a big company will come into town and they will want their event hosted and entertained by a corporate agency that chooses a large or small group to perform for a client. Now, this is the most important thing. This is what you're going to be most interested in throughout this course. This is some of the highest ticket, the most consistent, highest paid gigs in the scene realistically. Now, of course, and you're going to see as I go through my classification and as I go through this course with you, a lot of it is on the individual level. A lot of it is on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you'll have an individual gig that pays way more than a wedding would. But I'm just saying generally across the board, if you're consistently working for a talent agency or a booking agency in the corporate sphere, you'll be making consistently higher money than those individual gigs that I'm about to talk about in a second. Other things to note for corporate gigs. Because it varies in format so much, and because it varies in the actual agency, in the actual type of event, whether it be a wedding, corporate party, etc., it means that the type of music that you'll be playing it varies to a certain extent. And that is something that we're going to talk about in the next module, but keep that in mind as I push through all 4 of these classifications, that whatever event is being booked in each sphere, in each type of gig, it could vary. The type of music could vary. So keep that in mind. Corporate gigs, baby. Individual gig. This is one that, especially in the summer months, I find myself doing a lot more of, because the corporate gig scene, which I'll delve into a little bit more in the next module, is very seasoned, especially in a place here like Miami, Florida, where people are flying in to have a wedding, flying in to do their corporate award ceremony, or they do a corporate award ceremony at the end of their fiscal year, right? So it doesn't happen every day. So because of that, there is a pretty set 10-month, I'd say, season for these type of gigs. So sometimes in the summer months, when it's too hot here to host events, when weddings aren't coming from out of town as much, I fill my schedule with a lot of individual gigs. For sax players, it looks a lot like this. This is me playing different individual gigs. This one is at a museum with a fancy restaurant outside, a Michelin star restaurant. This gig actually entailed me to walk around the crowd and play for people that were enjoying their food and enjoying some of the art that was at the museum. This was actually an individual gig, but it was for a private event, and I'm going to explain to you what that means right now. Individual gig on the saxophone. It's just you. There's no DJ. There's no band. Your friends aren't there on stage with you. It is just you. And you might be thinking, how often does this happen? Admittedly, the saxophone is one of those instruments that we, lucky enough, have a lot of opportunity for individual gigs. And why I say lucky, I'm going to skip right here. Fluctuating pay scale. Obviously dependent on individual budget, but it's just you, right? You are the middleman. You are the one speaking to the client. You are the one that is figuring out all the logistics. A lot of the time, you're actually the one that's bringing the gear, and that also has to do with the pay scale. Sometimes, if it's a big individual gig, I will shell out some extra money. I will budget it into the pay scale to offset some of that equipment cost to like a third party, to an outside company. And that's something that in the networking element of my module, I will explain how to meet those individuals, how to get connected with companies that could provide you sound and all of that backline type stuff. But oftentimes for me, I just bring my own PA, I bring my own speakers, I bring my own tracks, which I'm going to talk about in a second as well. And that actually allows me to be compensated the maximum I can be compensated. Because of that, individually contracted through a W-4 that you have to fill out yourself. And once again, I know I keep saying I'm going to talk about stuff in the future, but this is our first module. There's so much for me to cover with you guys. So the W-4 is something that you should just have saved on your computer, especially for events like this, because you'll be filling that out and sending that to the client to make sure that you have their signatures, make sure that you have all of their information for when that tax season comes as well. Sax and tracks. Some people hate it. Some people love it. I think it is a means to an end. If you're looking to make consistent money in the music industry as a saxophone player, you should at least understand what this type of gig is. A lot of the time, and the way that I've been kind of contracting it in my schedule is with a pre-mixed DJ track. And I'm super excited. I have a whole lesson on this where I'm going to break down how to actually create your own pre-mix. It's super fun. It's a little time consuming, but I love it because it gives you full control over what music you're going to play on the gig without having to stop in between each song and press the next track, which is something that I did for so many years and only very recently learned how to break through into the pre-mix market. And actually, because you guys are joining me on this journey and because we're all hanging out here, I actually have a full catalog of backing tracks and pre-mixes that I've made for my gigs that I will share with you. So just keep clicking, keep going through the module. That's one of the materials that I'm super excited to share with you guys. And through this community, I want your opinions. I want to see what works for you guys as you go on your own journey with pre-mixes and backing tracks. But basically, it's just you. You're paid in full. You get to decide the logistics of it. You get to decide how you fill out your taxes and also how other people fill out their taxes, depending if you pay other people out. And the Sax and Tracks gives you full control over your own repertoire for these gigs. I actually enjoy these a lot. I used to dislike them early on because I felt like I needed to play a certain type of music. But now that I've been doing this for so many years, I realized that if you're enjoying the music that you play on these sort of gigs And if you create a premix that you love and that you know, show the audience that you're enjoying, it works just as well as if it's songs that they expect to hear every time. And you could be super creative with the way that you track out and plan out the repertoire for the individual gigs. Okay, this one has the most room for fluctuation. It's the artist gig. And this is what it looks like. My band is the band for the Florida Panthers hockey team. Right now I'm going into my 4th season with the team. They are the NHL team that actually last season won the Stanley Cup, if you're watching this in 2024, which was super fun. And I had a great opportunity these past seasons playing with them. This is also a picture of me playing with a band a little bit of a while ago back in New York. But this is just a picture that I had that kind of shows that for this gig, you're the side man. Whether or not you help book the gig or whether or not you even speak on the mic, which is something that I love doing. I love being an MC on a lot of these gigs. At the end of the day, for an artist gig, for what I classify an artist gig as, you are a side man. That set list is designated by the MD, the music director. Sometimes that's the lead singer. Sometimes that's even you. Sometimes you are part of figuring out the set list, but it is designated by whoever is decided to be the MD, the music director. These events are individually booked, but there's a variety of different booking personnel. Some of these artists come with their own booking agents. They come with their own management team. So they kind of figure out the booking on their own. I've actually been part of projects like for the one for the Panthers where I kind of take control of the booking myself. And that is also designated the same way that the band decides who the MD is. A lot of dots here. You could end up filling out taxes a variety of ways for an artist gig, and it has a lot to do with how you are compensated. Technically, here in the state of Florida, and also on the federal level, you are not required to fill out a W-4 if you are paid under $600. That is something that my accountant has multiple times relayed to me. So that is information I'm going to share. Once again, I'm not an accountant myself. So like, don't take anything I'm saying in the tax world fully as gospel. Like, you know, maybe the wording of things isn't exactly eloquent in my knowledge of taxes, but I pay them every year because we have to. It's something that's not very fun, but you end up learning a lot more than your friends about taxes if they're out of the music industry, just because our taxes that we file every year are so strange. And that's why I recommend working with an accountant. That's it. I'm talking a lot about taxes in this. I apologize. It's a variety of different ways. If you're paid less than $600 for a gig, or if you pay someone else less than $600 for a gig, then typically you don't have to worry about it. But if one person in this band is taking on that payment in like Zelle or Venmo or any of these online electronic payment systems that we use every day in this industry, then they're going to be taking on those taxes. So that's something that you need to work out with them. Artist gigs, oftentimes, hopefully, if you're in a very legitimate band, which I hope that all of you have at least a couple chances to experience, then there will be band contracts. There will be situations where you sign contracts that agree how the taxes are paid out, when the gigs are being paid out, because those payment schedules are different for all these opportunities as well. And that's something I will go into in that next module when we're going about the nitty gritty of each of these types of gigs and the repertoire and everything like that. But my little smiley face here is hiding my tears because there's a lot of humble pay in the artist gig world, in my experience. You don't always get those hefty, nice chunk of change that you get for the corporate gigs, and oftentimes for the individual gigs as well, those Saxon tracks, because you're splitting it sometimes between 10, 12 people. You know, I've been in large bands playing around the country, trying to tour and budget the money from the tour to be able to allow us to be on a bus or to allow us to have lodging in a hotel or flights. So because of that, in my experience and many people's experience in the industry, it's a little bit lower pay, but it is flexible due to budget. Sometimes you'll have an artist gig like this and it'll be at a huge venue. It'll be with ticket sales and you get a percentage of the bar. And, you know, there's ways that you negotiate for each of these types of gigs that could affect your bottom line. But I would definitely preface anytime you take an artist gig that in the back of your head, if they don't share that rate immediately when they give you the gig, expect it to be lower than the corporate and the individual gigs for you as the sideman, as a saxophonist. And last but not least, out of the four, this one is definitely the black sheep, but it believe it or not, opens a lot of doors for you in your career, and it's opened up a ton of doors for me in mine. This is the collaborative gig. Here are some pictures. This is a collaborative gig. We were actually booked by a hotel to provide weekly entertainment where we actually helped as a part of an open jam, open mic situation, which I will talk about on the next slide. So that's why we have ascots on and matching outfits. They actually paid for the whole band to have matching outfits. They were kind of picky about the way that we looked. It was a kind of foo-foo, fancy little restaurant that they had. And this is actually a studio session that I consider a collaborative gig, and I'm going to explain what that means. It's individually booked, a variety of booking personnel or yourself, because you're going to be speaking and someone is going to be speaking to a restaurant or a hotel in hospitality or to a studio space to essentially have on an off night of the week, a house band host an event where musicians get to sit in. And I know there's a big stigma to these collaborative gigs. You know, a lot of, serious professional musicians, especially here in Miami in different scenes, kind of avoid these sort of gigs. They see it more as elementary. They kind of look down upon it. But that's exactly why I actually have it classified as one of the big 4 types of gigs, because it is an untapped market nationwide. I have hosted open mic and open jams at restaurants where they've paid me just as much as an individual gig to have a house band sit in, have a house band host, other musicians sit in. So basically the band only plays maybe an hour of their own stuff maximum. Then you have other musicians come in and join you and you get to back them up. It ends up being a lot of fun, great networking. You get a real feel for the community that you're performing in, the musicians that are in your scene, the type of music that other people like to play and maybe are profiting just as much or more or less, but it gives you an idea of the scene. And also, it makes a restaurant be your best friend. This is a great way to open a door to a connection to staff weekly or monthly music at a venue, because if you come to them and they don't already have a night of the week where there's no entertainment and it's kind of slow, this is a good way to actually stimulate growth for a venue if it is in a community or a scene that there is a need for it, if that makes sense. So in my experience, back when I was living in New York, there was a venue not far from my house, actually, my childhood home where I grew up. And I was able to start an open mic night, and it ended up becoming a 3-time-a-month full paid out venture where the place became packed with musicians. They'd come in, their families, their friends would come to check their friends out. And it would end up like making this beautiful situation where different artists from different parts of the area are collaborating together. The stage is populated by all different types of musicians, all different types of instruments. And it honestly, I think it just stimulates just so much growth in a community. If you have the equity in your life, even one day a month, that you're able to either take less pay, sometimes no pay. I will be honest. I've done a couple of these before for tips only, but we all start somewhere, right? But try your best. If you could find a way to work one of these into your life, it's one of those things that stimulates your creative side and ends up leading to more gigs. I have met so many incredible musicians playing at open jams, open mics, and I've actually called them for other gigs or had them call me for their gigs. As a saxophone player, get used to being a hired gun. Get used to being someone that people are going to call maybe even just for one gig. And you get one with them, you get to have fun, then they get a different sax player next time, or maybe they don't have the budget to have a sax player every single time. But it's one of those instruments, and it's an amazing opportunity that we have, that we could be a hired gun for so many different types of opportunities. And that's kind of why we have these 4, the big 4 I call them. The reason that I made this slide is to show you that even though I have them split up as 4 different, when I had on this slide here, it might be jarring because it looks like it's just, 4 different, they're in their own bubbles. But in reality, a lot of times you'll see them connect in this Venn diagram I created. And it's kind of a weird looking Venn diagram. I'm going to get into it. The corporate gig is one that encompasses all 4. Because you could have a corporate artist gig. You could be a sideman for a band, but it's hired to play at a wedding with those big ticket prices, hired through a booking agency. There's a couple different companies here that actually do that. They staff out bands and they have bands in their catalog, and then they advertise those bands to play at their corporate events. So even though you're hired by a corporation, by a corporate agency for a corporate gig like a wedding, you're actually being hired as an artist, like as a band that's already formed with a lead singer, with a front man, considering it in my eyes to be an artist gig and a corporate gig. Collaborative gig and a corporate gig could be a thing as well. Some of these restaurants that you book for actually already use an agent. One of these restaurants I actually worked at weekly here the whole summer in Miami, worked with a booking agent to play there every week. And I would have musicians, some of my friends, come and sit in to stimulate growth for the restaurant. So that was an example of a collaborative gig where musicians are coming in from different parts of the community through a corporate entity. I was being paid through a booking agent. So that's a collaborative corporate gig. This one is the rarest, I think, of all of these, but it would be a corporate gig where they hire an artist to play. So it'd be like a restaurant like the one I played in Miami. If they hired me to have a full band with an artist, with a front man, and then as a band, we actually hosted an open mic night, that would be a corporate artist collaborative gig. Sorry for the semantics. Sorry for the lot of words. It's a little confusing, but I feel like this kind of visually makes it make a little bit more sense. The only one that is the offshoot is the individual and corporate. So many times you're going to be right here. You're going to be booked to do a cocktail hour for a wedding where it's just you and tracks. You play for 1 hour, but you're hired through a booking agency. That makes that a corporate individual gig. Another example of a corporate individual gig is like if you're playing at a restaurant that only wants you to play and they only want sax and tracks, or in a lot of cases here in Miami, you get paid a decent chunk of money to play in a fancy hotel lobby as an individual. So you get paid by a corporate agency to play an individual gig like a hotel lobby gig for 3 or 4 hours. But that's why this Venn diagram exists, just to kind of visualize the way that the corporate gig kind of encompasses all of the ones here, but also the individual and the artist and collaborative, they all kind of blend in with each other in different ways. So those are the 4 types of gigs. I could also talk in the next module about specifically how much money you might expect to get from each of these types of gigs. And that could also be something that we work out individually in our one-on-one calls. Choking over here, choking on these gigs. Once we get into some of these calls, each scene, each community kind of has a different price point. So that's something we could also work out once I see your spec sheet, see everything in your individual musical journey. But thank you guys for checking this one out. These are the 4 types of gigs. See you in the next one.